comes this morning from Matthew chapter 6. I'm beginning to read in verse 19 through verse 24. The text is on the screen, but if you have your Bibles, I'd encourage you to follow along because I'm going to be making some notations throughout the sermon that I think will help you to understand this text. These are the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, some Bibles say good. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, some translations read bad. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Jesus concludes with these words: no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money, or mammon, as some texts read. A survey reports that the two most frequently asked questions in America are these: how can I lose weight? And where can I park my car? Think about it. While the rest of the world is desperately trying to increase their intake of food, we are trying to decrease ours. While much of the world lives in shacks hardly larger than our tool sheds, many Americans park their cars in garages built for at least 2, if not 3 automobiles. No wonder an Asian visiting our country remarked that the most vivid impression he had of Americans was this: it was the size of our garbage cans. We are the affluent society, a society built on hard work, equal opportunity, free enterprise, and rugged individualism. And how does Christ Church respond to this issue of affluence? I will tell you. With silence and spiritual laryngitis, with ambiguity and uncertainty, with justifications and rationalizations, with arrogance and insensitivity. But make no mistake, that is not the response of the Bible. I invite you to sit with me this morning at the feet of its greatest teacher. His name is Jesus, and his words are penetrating and piercing, as well as pointed and powerful. In Matthew 6, 19 to 24, Jesus warns us of the dangers of affluence. And that sets before us a primary obligation of affluence. In these verses, he sets before us both an expose of materialism and an alternative to that materialism. Let's begin with Jesus' teaching on the dangers of affluence, an expose of materialism. When it comes to money and material possessions, Jesus warns us of 4 dangers. Here's the first. Affluence offers us no real security. Affluence offers us no real security. Look at verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin, the word can also mean rust, destroy, and thieves break in and steal. In the ancient world, wealth was measured by 3 forms: clothing, grain, and gold. Do you see what Jesus is saying? Our clothing is subject to moths. Our grain is subject to being eaten by vermin, that is, rats and mice, or if it's metal, of being corroded and rusted. And our gold, along with our jewels, can be carried off by thieves. Is it any different today? I don't think so. Jesus is saying our clothes, our Calvin Klein jeans, our Christian Dior shirts, our Liz Claiborne dresses are all subject to moths. Our automobiles, our Honda Odysseys, our Toyota Camrys, our Ford Fusions are all subject to rust. Our valuables, our fine china and expensive jewelry, our iPads and laptop computers, along with our high-definition TVs and VCRs, are all subject to thieves. Even our financial portfolios, our stocks and bonds, our mutual funds and certificates of deposit are all subject to a collapsing market. Here, my friends, is what Jesus is saying. No material resource you enjoy is really secure. Natural forces, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, floods, even insects can render them valueless in just a moment of time. Furthermore, human forces, thieves, terrorists, dictators, military personnel, even the IRS can take your resources from you in a moment. The late Bishop Edwin Hughes once delivered a rousing sermon that put one of his rich parishioners' noses out of joint. The wealthy man invited the bishop for lunch the next week, and when they were through, proceeded to walk him through his property, full of elaborate gardens, exquisite woodlands, and rich farm soil. Then, pointing out his picture window, he said, "Now, are you going to tell me, Reverend, that all this land does not belong to me?" Bishop Hughes smiles and then suggested, "Ask me that 100 years from now, sir. When it comes to money and possessions, it's true. You can't take it with you. It's all destined for destruction, for some city dump." Let me tell you a little story from my own family. When my girls were young, I took a year, and every week after school, one day, I'd pick them up from work. We'd go to my office, and we'd do what I called discipleship. We wouldn't spend more than 15 minutes. It would be something simple, and then we'd do something fun. They looked forward to it because it was fun. They learned because it was something about Christian discipleship. And when it came to the subject of money, I decided that I'd take both daughters to the city dump. When I took my oldest daughter, who was 7 at the time, to the city dump, I backed my Delta Royale Oldsmobile up to the smoldering mounds of burning refuge. I set her on top of the car, gave her an 8.5 pad of paper, and said, "I want you to write down everything you see that you would like to have if it were new." I still have in my possession the sheet she wrote. Let me give just a few of the things. There was a metal bicycle frame, an old baby buggy, a barbecue pit, a plastic pool. There was a basketball hoop and a basketball backboard. Then as we were driving out, we stopped to ask the man at the dump what kinds of things people leave, and he said, "Oh, they leave everything. They bring refrigerators, stoves, rocking chairs, couches, TVs." When we were driving down I-17 from the city dump, I couldn't believe it. We pulled up alongside a tractor trailer with 2 trailers loaded with 5 cars each. They were crushed and rusted. And I leaned over to Kristen and I said, honey, this is where this beautiful Delta Royale Oldsmobile is headed. It's headed for the city dump. You know what she wrote across this paper? In big letters at the top, junk. In big letters in the middle, junk. In big letters at the bottom, junk. And then she wrote next to the word junk, passes away, goes to waste. Affluence. Material things. I don't care how many you have or how much they mean to you. Jesus is saying they offer us no real security. As my daughter said, they are all passing away. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes on to say, not only does affluence offer us no real security, it deprives us of our freedom. Look at verse 21. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Make no mistake about it. One's interests always lie with one's investments. Show me your checkbook or your credit card statements, and I'll show you where your heart is. That's Jesus' point. If our primary investments are rooted in planet Earth, then that's where our hearts will be rooted, on planet Earth. Years ago, when Sharon and I were newly married, and in our first few years of graduate school, we needed a new automobile. We found ourselves one afternoon at a Mercedes-Benz dealership. I didn't know anything about Mercedes-Benz, but when I drove this car, it was the most beautiful car I had ever driven. Of course, it was used. I was making $50 a month, and Sharon was making $125 a month. Now, at the university, because I was a graduate assistant, we had free room and board. I liked that car. So I decided to call my mother and ask if she could float us a loan. My mother was a woman of very common means. She was frugal. And when she heard the word Mercedes-Benz, she didn't say it this crassly, but in essence what she said was this: son, take the rocks out of your head and use them to fill the holes in your wife's head. You don't need a Mercedes-Benz. You know, if we'd purchased that automobile on our salary, we wouldn't have owned it. It would have owned us. That's the point Jesus is making. Affluence, materialism deprives us of our freedom. Cyprian, a 3rd century bishop of Carthage, put it like this in a sermon describing the rich of his day. Their property held them in chains. Chains that shackled their courage and choked their faith and hampered their judgment and throttled their soul. Affluence, Jesus says, not only offers us no real security, affluence deprives us of our freedom. But that's not all. Look at verses 22 and 23. Affluence, Jesus says, distorts our perspective. He writes, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, that is good. Your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, that is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light was in you as darkness, how great is that darkness? In verse 22, the eye represents our perspective on material things. And the body stands for you and me, that is, our lives. Now, if our perspective on material possessions is unhealthy, that is, jaded or perverted, then Jesus says your whole perspective, your whole life will be confused and out of whack. If, on the other hand, your perspective on material things is healthy, that is good, your whole life will be pleasing to God. So how do we assess the state of our material perspective. The words healthy and unhealthy provide the answer. Healthy means generous. Unhealthy means stingy. Let me show you in the Old Testament. These are two translations from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. The Greek translation. So it corresponds with the Greek language used in the New Testament. Proverbs 11:25. A generous person. That word generous is the same word that occurs in Matthew 6:22 for healthy. It's the Greek word haplous. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Or look at Deuteronomy 15:7-9. If anyone is poor among you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. The context is obviously one of stinginess. And then Moses goes on to say, rather be open-handed and freely lend whatever they need. Be careful so that you do not show ill will. There's that word paneros, or the word unhealthy. Do not show ill will. That is, do not be hard-hearted, do not be tight-fisted, do not be stingy. What Jesus is saying is this: via your material outlook, your whole life will be exposed for what it is. If your eye is not clear, that is healthy, when it comes to material things, your whole life will be out of whack. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism 2 centuries ago, warned about how easily and subtly the acquisition of things in the West can dull our commitment to spiritual things. He writes, I fear wherever riches have increased, the essence of religion has decreased in the same proportion. Therefore, I do not see how it is possible in the nature of things for any revival of true religion to continue long. For religion must necessarily produce both industry and frugality, and these cannot but produce riches. But as riches increase, so will pride and love for the world. See what Wesley is saying? Devotion to the Christian faith ends up producing personal discipline and hard work. And personal discipline and hard work in turn end up moving us toward affluence. And then he says, be careful, because affluence can all too easily dull your devotion to Jesus Christ and to a life of discipleship. Here again are the dangers of affluence. Affluence offers us no real security. It deprives us of our freedom. It distorts our perspective. And now look at what Jesus says finally. It all too easily leads to idolatry. Look at verse 24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. He doesn't say you should not, you may not. He says you cannot love God and money. Now, the Greek word for money here is mammon. The meaning of this word is not without controversy, which is why in some translations it's simply left untranslated. The old King James simply said, you cannot love God and mammon. I sense this word is connected to the Old Testament word amen, which is believe or trust. We find it in Genesis 15:6 when God says of Abraham, Abraham believed, that is, he trusted, he amened, and it was counted to him for righteousness. That's the danger of material things. God entrusts all of these wonderful things to us, but the danger is that we can ultimately put our trust in those material things. In trying to serve God and money, we can easily end up serving money. I think back to the fall of 2008 when the stock market collapsed And we watched our financial portfolios implode. Sharon had lost a considerable amount of savings for retirement. And in that moment, we had to ask ourselves, is our ultimate hope in Morgan Stanley? Or is it in the God of the Bible? Is it in Wall Street? Or is it on God Street? Here then in Matthew 6 is Jesus' analysis of the dangers of affluence. Affluence offers us